Good morning to each and every one of you. I obviously see a lot of familiar faces, but in case you don't know who I am, my name is Adam Waite. I am the minister of music here at Montview Boulevard Presbyterian Church. Today is a really special day for us at Montview. This culminates essentially a 2-year journey for us in that our spring concert, the first in 3 years, is happening this afternoon. And this concert will be a world premiere of a work that we have commissioned. I've been involved in other premieres, and certainly I've written some music along the way that has been premiered. But this has been a truly unique experience for me to be involved in commissioning a piece of such magnitude. Never have I been involved in commissioning a work that's so large. This piece of music clocks in at almost an hour long, and a piece of music that we intended to be important from the outset. And that's that can be a pretty heavy lift, especially for the creative folks involved, to know that we want this piece to be important. So I'll just give you a little background about my thinking about this piece of music before I introduce our composer and librettist. When the pandemic happened and we got shut down, and obviously our choir activities drew to a total standstill. I'm not sure if you remember, but there was an article early on in the New York Times and other news sources about this choir in Washington State, I believe, and they had the choir rehearsal, and COVID spread like wildfire through that choir. So we knew very, very soon on that choral singing in the pandemic would not be possible. And and during that time, obviously, you reflect back on choir and the things that you miss from that. And one of the things that I did during that was watch some of our videos of previous choir concerts. And one in particular I found to be quite striking, and that was our performance of Duke Ellington's Sacred Concert. And that was here in the sanctuary. Not that long ago, although now it seems like forever ago, and that was our last spring concert. That was May of 2019, and if you were here for that, you may remember, we had about 115 singers up here. We had a full big band, and out in the audience, or the congregation, were about 900 people. And it was the end of the concert, had a dancer come out, and the choir came off the risers and came out into the congregation, and everyone stood up and was clapping and it was dancing, and there was Presbyterians standing up and clapping and dancing. It was very mind-blowing experience. But it was a whole mix of emotions watching this, watching all the joy just bursting out of this room, but standing in the contrast to the reality we were living in at that present day of COVID. It was like, everyone needs to get away from each other, watching it. I'm like yelling into YouTube, you're all gonna catch it, So in watching that, I started to realize that whenever we come back from COVID, and whenever we're back to normal, whatever that is, wouldn't it be great to have another piece of music that brings our hearts to a place like the Ellington brought it. And then I started thinking through the music that was available to us, and nothing was fitting the bill. Everything seemed as though it wasn't relevant to today. And then I started to realize, I think we need a new piece of music. I think we need a piece of music that's written, reflective of our time, that speaks to what we've been through now, not to what a previous generation was through. And I also realized that it might have to be something rooted in jazz again, that there is something about the improvisatory nature of jazz music that can elicit a reaction in your soul and in your heart that's different than what we would kind of conceive of as classical music. Although I really hate categorizing music. At the end of the day, when you hear Ike and Shanda's piece later this afternoon, you'll discover that it's not jazz with a capital J, it's jazz with a very lowercase j, and it crosses into all these different types of music. But there is an improvisatory nature to it. And maybe that's something, too, about the feeling I had about the present, right, and reaching into the now, right? An improv solo is very much of the present and is very much the now. So it's at that point I started to think, okay, who could do this, right? And who could write such a piece? And so we'll get into these two cats, as Ike likes to call folks, here in a bit, but and the way I know them. But let's just say I am terribly, terribly fortunate to know Ike and Chanda, and so lucky that they agreed to be a part of this project. So let me now that you have the background, let's get these two wonderful people out here. I'd like to introduce to you the composer for this afternoon's work, Ike Sturm, and the librettist, Chanda Rule. All right, so have a seat on these lovely stools. These two just flew in. Chanda flew in late last Friday night, not last night, although it probably feels like last night to you. And Chanda, where did you fly in from?
I flew in from...
Oh. Wait 1 second.
I don't know.
Oh, there you go.
There we are. I flew in from Vienna, Austria.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Thank you.
We have some...
for the long flight, clap.
Vienna, Austria fans in the house. And Ike, you came in from equally as exotic milieu of...
Yeah, I came from New York. Yep.
Yeah.
Not as long a flight as Chanda, but...
So we're really happy, obviously, to have him here, especially happy to have Chanda here. And thank you for flying in all the way from Vienna for this. So I thought what would be nice is if we could, I love starting at the beginning, right? And just hearing about, how you came to be the artists that you are. So a great first question, and Chanda, we'll get started with you, if that's all right. When you're growing up, you grew up outside of Chicago. Like, what were your first experiences with music? Like, what kind of music was being played around the house? What's your background? And how did you start becoming a musician yourself?
Oh, thank you. This is a great question, and I'm excited to answer because my parents are actually here. And hi. And I grew up surrounded by music. So my mom has a strong history of being in choirs. She's always loved singing in choirs, singing in harmony, so she always sang with me. Since I could remember, we were singing together. And we also went to church, and there was a lot of music in church. And then my dad, when I was younger, always had music playing. He played lots of Stevie Wonder, Earth, Wind and Fire, James Brown, so
Nice.
there was always music around.
Yeah. And then at what kind of church were you raised in or that you would sing in?
Oh, this is also interesting because there were a lot of different traditions. So the church that I spent the most time in was Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago, which is United Church of Christ. But when I was younger, we were at Baptist churches, and my family members, who we were also very close to, we went to church with them sometimes. So Church of God in Christ, there was it AME also? So, and my dad also worked with a lot of churches for his business. So I was always around many different denominations, and they all had an influence.
Yes. So you're kind of growing up in the church very much part of you. Ike, we know you heard a lot of music around the house too growing up. Why don't you tell us about your first experiences with music?
Yeah, well, I have a very musical family, musical parents and musical grandparents. Great-grandparents actually were instrument builders, and my grandma was an opera singer, my grandpa was in the Chicago Symphony, and my dad, who's a huge part of what we're doing here, was one of my teachers and a great arranger and composer. But I was thinking about Earth, Wind and Fire and some of the music you were talking about. We were listening to a lot of the same stuff in my house, actually. But my early memory around music, my dad played the euphonium or the baritone, kind of like a small tuba, and he would play Bach cello suites and all sorts of beautiful kind of orchestral music on that. And I think those are when you mentioned you were going to ask us about earliest memories. That's what popped up for me. But just music all the time and hanging around. Last night we got to hang with some of our musical guests that are here for this weekend from all over the country, and my kids are here too, and so they get to hanging with those musicians reminded me of being with my dad's friends and getting to know them too. It was fun.
So if you don't know, in addition to being a fabulous composer, Ike is also a fabulous bassist. And was bass your first instrument, or did you have another instrument along the way that you learned?
Yeah, I did play a little bit of tuba too, but when I was young, my dad said, you're going to play bass. He said, you'll always have a gig. Everybody needs bass players. And so I started playing. Actually, my school didn't have an upright bass, and so they had a cello, and I tuned it in fourths and stood up with a cello when I was 9 and got a hold of an electric bass and, kind of started having fun from there.
Yeah. So when did you feel like you're going to go into music was it something that, because you had this whole lineage in your family, it was just kind of like assumed that you'd go into music, or did you make a conscientious decision along the way as like a middle schooler or high schooler that, having a career in music was the way to go?
Yeah, when I was about 12, I remember driving down the road in Wisconsin where I grew up, and Dad said, please don't be a musician. And he said, if you have to be a musician, that's okay, but please be a baseball player.
Right.
But my 50-mile-an-hour fastball just wasn't cutting it,
Right.
And so
because it's a lot easier to make it as a basebal player.
Right, no pressure, right?
Right.
Oh, but he loved baseball, but yeah.
So it was about when you were 12, and then you went off to Eastman, correct, for undergrad?
Yeah, when I was about 14, I started, my younger daughter's 13 now, and she's actually studying with our guitar player, Jesse, who's here for this piece. And when I was around that age, I started to just want to play all the time, no matter what. Yeah. It's like I had to get into the music at any point. So from there, it just kind of led me to Eastman, where I went to school.
And Chanda, so you're singing as a kid, and you're hanging out a lot at the church. But then at a certain point, you developed this real interest in writing, too.
Yes, I always loved writing. I also always loved singing, but that was kind of a secret.
Oh, okay.
So I would sing in the basement or with my cousins and friends, and I loved it. And I secretly wanted to do it, but it just didn't seem like a real thing for me.
Yeah.
It wasn't real. And writing also was a little bit on the edge of being a real job that I could actually see myself doing. But it was there. And
Yeah.
so I ended up studying journalism.
Right.
Yeah.
So you went to school for journalism. And where did you end? What city was that? Was that in Chicago, or did you?
No, I moved to Washington, D.C. I went to
Okay.
Howard.
Oh, okay.
So I studied journalism there.
And then at a certain point, you find your way to New York City. So when you landed in New York, was that as an aspiring journalist or an aspiring musician, or where were you in that process?
Yeah, at that point, I had switched over more to publishing.
Okay.
And of course, at the time, Madison Avenue is the place to be for that. So I wanted to work in New York in the publishing industry. And I ended up working a bit in public relations first. And then I moved over to McGraw-Hill when McGraw-Hill was McGraw-Hill. I don't know what they are now. I did that for a while. And then I kind of got tired of going to work every day. I mean, after a year, I'm like, is this my life? I was so young. I was like 22, and
Right.
I would do the same thing. I would get up and go to work and do the whole New York morning, and then I didn't have any money, so I'd be at home watching television on the weekends.
Right.
And I said, this can't be my life for the next 20 years. Yeah.
So then did you feel any, would you, describe that as like a call, or were you feeling it, or is it more of like discontent that was driving you, or how would you describe that kind of transition into music? It's funny because usually for people around that age, the transition is usually the other way. I know a lot of folks that were musicians through high school, college, went off to study, and then they see what the real world is like, and they're like, I don't want this, or it's just they realize, hey, there's a lot more to the world than just music, and I want to go explore other things. Yeah. It's something else to be at that stage and go, okay, now I'm gonna start to transition to being a musician. So that obviously took a lot of courage and a lot of faith on your part. What was going through your mind at that point?
Wow, there was a lot. So there was a lot of discontent, but there was also a moment. I had a moment on the PATH train, and
it's always into New Jersey. We have the moments.
New Jersey. Yeah, I had this moment. I was listening. I had my headphones on, and I had a moment of "You should be singing," that I heard very clearly through the music, and I thought I was insane. I'm like, what? I thought somebody said it to me. And then I was like, okay, all right, let me sit here and pretend like everything's okay, but I know I just heard something.
That's crazy.
It was
Yeah.
a wild moment, and this is when I was still working in public relations, so I pretty much ignored it because I'm like, no, this is crazy.
Right.
And then the day that I decided, I'm like, okay, I need to figure out something. I need to take a day off of work. This was probably a half a year later at least. And I remember going to the park, I'm writing in my journal, I'm like, I'm gonna figure this out. I'm 22, I'm gonna figure out my life right now. I'm sitting by this tree, I'm like, this is what I want. And then I'm like, okay, well, you can't have that because that's too insane. What else could you do?
Right.
Well, maybe I'll try acting, right?
What's with you guys picking like baseball, acting? Like, let's pick the one oh yeah, those are easy to get into. There's hardly any competition there. Yeah.
No, this is easier than singing. But listen, I'm sitting at this tree writing, and I look up, and there's literally an acting group. It was the the Jersey City Shakespeare in the Park Company.
Oh wow. Is
in front of me, and I go back and I'm like, oh my God, this is there's people in front of me. What should I do? Because I'm still talking to myself writing, and I'm like, I'm gonna ask one of the actors, where I can start. And so I go up to one of the actors, I'm like, yeah, I think I want to be an actor. What should I do? Should I take classes? And they're so friendly, like, oh, you should talk to the director. He knows everything. So I said, oh my God. So I go back and I write that down. They said to talk to the director. So then when they take a break, I go up to this guy and I'm extremely nervous and I give him my spiel. Oh, I have this job and I think I'm supposed to do something else. I want to be an actress. What should I do? And he looks me up and down. And then he says, go stand over there. And I'm like, okay. So basically, he cast me as an extra right then. So that was that, really. And that's how that got started. And I was an extra for them. And then I started getting little parts. And then, like, literally miraculous things. Someone's like, do you sing? I'm like, a little bit. Well, you should meet this person. And so then I would audition. And of course, in New York, you have to sing for everything.
Yes.
And so I started singing. And yeah, it went from there. So it was very, miraculous things opened up. And that's really how everything has gone since then.
So tell us about some of the experiences then that you had in New York. Like, what are your, like when you look back on those years, what are some of your most impactful music making experiences? Like, you know, everyone's got like a couple of those like gigs or concerts that they can think back, oh yeah, that was great, right? Do you have a couple of those that you think back on? I mean, if you want to include Ike in it in the story. Oh, that one time with Ike, that was great. No.
I mean, great. I think I really struggled for a very long time because I didn't have a traditional background and I always thought I was lacking something. Mm-hmm. So I can't say I had this, oh, this is great moment, but I did have moments of, okay, I can take the next step. Okay, I can make this decision, or the decision to not do musical theater anymore was a big decision. Like that night was huge because in theater you have to do the same thing every night.
Right.
And this particular night I decided I was going to change everything and not tell anyone. And then, it was, okay, that was nice, but you can't do that. And I'm like, okay, well, I think I need to be doing some other things. I need to be writing music or trying something else. And so that was a big evening.
Oh my gosh, I love your creative courage. Like it takes a lot of creative guts to do something like that.
Just being naive also.
Well. Okay, so Ike, you ended up in New York too, and after college, and let's talk about how you ended up at St. Peter's. So why don't you tell everyone, for those that don't know, what exactly St. Peter's is and how exactly you came to be the 24, 25-year-old? How old were you?
Yeah, I think I was 24.
24-year-old.
Yeah.
Jazz ministries director at St. Peter's.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
It was crazy. Yeah. Well, my wife and I had moved, when we finished our master's degrees in Rochester, we moved down to New York because that's sort of what everybody did. If you're a musician, it's like, okay, I think we don't know what it's going to look like, but this is what we do. And she had a teaching job down there. And I had been so busy as I finished in Rochester, and then I entered this phase of like the wilderness, not quite wilderness on Long Island, but it was, the figurative wilderness of just not knowing what was next musically. And I taught a couple of cello lessons and very random kinds of things that were happening. And I really felt pretty lost at that time because I thought, this couldn't maybe similar. The parallel of this can't be leading to this moment. Like this can't be where I'm headed. And I was playing I have a vivid memory of a Sunday morning gig that I played at the Bowery Poetry Club, which is in New York City. And it's about as funky as you might imagine in your head when I say that. But it's, I was there and playing with a group that I didn't really know. And I had this kind of like, bottom of the barrel kind of like feeling of like, wow, this is, I'm not sure that this is the path, And I opened up this magazine that's called All About Jazz, and sure enough, there's this big ad, bigger than my hand, that just said Lutheran Church. I grew up Lutheran in Wisconsin. That's what you do in Wisconsin, by the way. And it said Lutheran Church seeking jazz musician and composer for music director, and I was like, what? these two big parts of my life, I didn't know there was a connection between those two things. And so I got really excited and learned a little bit about the history at St. Peter's, which is, they call it the Jazz Church for good reason. For over 50 years they had, I know you all have history with Duke Ellington here at your amazing church. And his funeral was there, and the music that was played here for the Ellington sacred music was actually, some of it was actually composed for the pastor who was at St. Peter's. There's a movement called the Shepherd of the Night Flock, which is named after him, because he would go to bars and minister to musicians late at night. And the church recognized that you can't hang out till 3 or 4 in the morning working with musicians and show up at 8 or 9 the next morning going to be a pastor. So they actually named him Jazz Pastor, and he created this incredible scene there, and that lasted into the early 90s. And
I'm going to interrupt for 1 second. If you caught that, that's that, if you remember back to that piece of music, the shepherd was that real kind of saucy trumpet. Shane played it, I believe, on our concert. With the plunger, it was an instrumental piece only. So that was the pastor at St. Peter's. I just want to make sure everyone recognized what exact movement that was, if we remember from that piece. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wish I had been able to meet him. He passed away before I was at the church, but his protege was a man named Dale Lind, and he's a dear friend of mine. He's in his late 80s now, and I stay in touch with him a lot. And he was really my mentor. And he grew up having a bar ministry in New York City, working with musicians at a place called Preacher's Cafe, who all these incredible, my heroes, musical heroes, all went through there and played there. And so Dale is an amazing person. So I really learned the community with them and with Dale. And so I got this, I went there and brought some of my music, which eventually made its way into my jazz mass. But our audition was to bring in settings not unlike what we're going to do this afternoon, to show what we would do in worship with a hymn or a psalm. Shannon and I did so much of that together at St. Peter's years later, but it led, I was really fortunate. I think there were quite a few people that applied for that job, and I got it as a young guy. Our pastor said he thought when he saw my name and background, he thought I was like in my 60s. And so he was surprised when I walked in and looked like I was about 14, but I thank God I got that job and was there until last summer when I resigned there to move on to some other things like this amazing stuff that we're doing here. So
at a certain point, Chanda, you come to know Ike. Mm-hmm. And was that through St. Peter's, or was it separate from St. Peter's? Like, what was the first gig you had with Ike?
Yeah, through Nick Russo. And I jokingly say that I stalked him for a while, because I sent you lots of emails that you did not reply to for a while.
I don't know anything about that.
But we have a mutual friend, and I finally sent an email with his name in the subject line, so you responded. And
I'm glad we can work this out in front of everybody. This is great.
No, I mean, I got a lot of emails, because as jazz pastor, so many people were always reaching out. So I'm sure you had probably several hundreds of emails coming through. So yeah, and then we met, and you asked me to come out and hear a mass at St. Peter's, and I still remember going.
I thought you came on Palm Sunday.
Was it Palm Sunday?
We remember totally different things. But I have a vivid memory of you coming and singing the Alleluia, or the Hosanna.
Oh, no, I came once before that just to check everything out. You invited me.
Okay.
It was so beautiful. And then I must have come back and sang. Did I come right back and sing?
You did.
Wow.
I didn't let much time pass.
Okay.
And yeah, I never will forget you singing that, because it was just lit the whole place up, and it was amazing. Okay. So, yep. Yeah. And when was that about? Was it like 2010 or something like that?
No, because I remember taking off to get married, and I got married in 2008. So
okay.
This was
early on.
Yeah, this was either early 2008, late 2007.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we eventually convinced the leadership and pastors at St. Peter's to have what we called song leaders at St. Peter's. My wife, Misty, who's here, she'll be here singing in the choir this afternoon. And Chanda and another dear friend of ours who's Canadian named Melissa Stilianu, and they became like our choir of song leaders, and they're all moms, so I would always have one of them at least that would be well and able to be there. I had to have 3 to start with, but they're unbelievable singers. Chanda, I hope that Chanda can come back so you can really hear her sometime, because she sings like no one else. It's incredible. So, and she's very modest about it. She says, "Oh yeah, I sing a little bit," and then you hear her sing, and it's a whole different thing. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, amazing.
So, Chanda, when you walked into St. Peter's the first time, had you ever experienced like a jazz worship service? What was that vibe like for you walking in there?
Yet, no, I had never heard of a jazz mass or a jazz service. I mean, it was very different because Ike's music and his vibe is, I'd never heard anything like that. And I think a lot of the jazz I heard that maybe would have been associated with church in my mind was extremely traditional music, maybe brought into a service. But what he was doing with really creating something completely original in this sense, it was something so beautiful that I immediately wanted to be a part of.
Yeah.
Whatever he was doing.
And that kind of coincided, or maybe it was a little bit after, because you mentioned this feeling of wanting to go off script, right, and start to find ways of being more improvisatory with your music making. Is that, because you mentioned that earlier about being in music theater and like, well, I'm just going to start making some stuff up. Was that happening at about the same time, or how did that all line up for you?
No. This was probably a decade later.
Okay.
About.
Okay.
Oh, almost. It was a while later.
Yeah.
And I think that might have happened as we went along. I think the whole
Like in the
improvising the
Psalms,
psalm and stuff.
we started to bring text, and I would write a psalm every week, and then other liturgical music as well. But then one week, I don't know what happened.
Music that makes community happen.
That was part of it too, right?
Yes.
And we started to take just a text. So we take a psalm, and I'd hand it to Chanda and just say, I don't know what key this is going to be in. I don't know what the tempo will be. I don't know what the form will be, but let's follow each other. And maybe I'll start a bass line and you start singing. And it's like kind of like jumping, like, hang gliding or jumping off a cliff or something. Because even when you've done it thousands of times like we have, there's always a twinge of like, wow, this is scary. This is on edge.
So we're going to stop for a second because I think that needs a little explaining.
Okay.
So let's be really clear with everybody because you just laid a bunch of jazz term or music terms on us all. So this is kind of how your collaborations started to develop. And explain this again, Ike. What was written down?
Only text.
Only text. So we're talking about a psalm. Okay. And so you hand the psalm to Chanda, and you say to Chanda, we're going to make music out of this, right? We're going to perform this now. And that's literally it?
Yeah.
I mean, you get that?
But there's so much that goes into it. People would say like, oh, sometimes with classical music, it's clear. This is what you practice. This is what evolves. This is what gets delivered. And in this improvisatory environment, it's kind of the same thing. We're improvising right now as we speak. We all improvise every day. And as improvisers in music, we hone that and we decide, okay, I know my scales. I play with these different grooves. We grew up listening to the same music in a lot of ways. So we have this shared vocabulary and understanding. And I think the beautiful thing, the connection to me, spiritually and kind of as a spiritual practice, this idea of listening and playing music together is so attuned, is so delicate, is so sensitive that I feel like that's the way that I want to be in my spiritual life when I listen to God through the scriptures or through nature or these different elements. And so I think that practice is scary and absolutely exhilarating. So we tried that and all of a sudden, in a humble way, I realized that was way cooler than what I wrote last week. What just happened? That was incredible. The Spirit was with us, and all of this music evolved. And so we had this band called Evergreen that Chanda was a part of, and it sort of became our liturgical house band. Some things would be created and composed, some would be improvised, some would be half and half. And the group was just like a living, breathing. I was thinking about this morning, having you and Lauren and Misty, all together this weekend. And really, really special stuff that continues to feed kind of our creative lives, even now as we play this piece here. It's all part of the fabric,
At what point, Chanda, did you turn around to Ike and say, well, I've got these words here? Because you started writing some texts, correct?
Yes.
And Ike started setting those to music, or maybe they flowed through the same improvisatory. And I love the way, quick aside, I love the way, Ike, you always are quick to remind us how music is language. And when we are in dialogue with each other and conversation, we're always improvising. And I think it really almost demystifies the idea of a musician improvising, because it's just like talking, right? And we can all do that without too much thought. Some of us, myself maybe especially, could use to think a little bit more before the words come out of my mouth.
That's what Lena said this morning.
But at any rate, but yeah, so getting back to, what was that like for you when you started to feel like, oh, I want to bring in, was that something Ike was asking for, or did you just say, I'm going to just start bringing in texts that I'm writing? How did that come to be?
No, this was actually a process that I went through in seminary, and I think there was one thing. I said, I'm open to everything, but I don't want to write any sermons. I don't want to preach. I don't want to do that. I want to do everything else. And so my advisors really, they saw that. They're like, okay, we're going to poke there. And they really challenged me. So then I said, okay, well, I'll do something traditional. I'll just write what I know. And they're like, nope, you're supposed to be creative. Do something more. And so I started writing these stories. And my advisor is a huge Ike fan. And he said, why don't you think about how you could add music to this and do something that you're doing? And I think Ike would be perfect. And of course, you were perfect, and I would have thought of that anyway, so there was two of us. And that's how that went. So I had the stories, and one thing that we didn't mention is that when we created the Psalms in the moment, 90%, well, I'm going to say 80 to 90% of the time, we tried to involve the congregation. So there was always a call and response line. And so I wanted to incorporate that into these stories. And so this was already something that we were doing. And so naturally I said, I'm going to ask Ike. And Ike immediately was just like, yeah, I'm down. So I just had these stories, and it was improvisatory. We would do it in the moment and come up with this wonderful atmosphere of like sound and story.
Yeah. Well, and hearing you talk about theological school reminds me that, this could be a 3-part series. You guys have such interesting journeys, and I feel like we could just spend the whole time talking about the journey. We're never going to get to the piece. And I'm going to push us along a little bit, but folks should also find out. I think it's fascinating, your embrace of music, but then somehow the writing was still there, and then this call to go back to seminary when you went to Union, and yeah, so you'll have to come back, Chanda. We'll have to fly you back from Vienna for part 2. So yeah, let's get in a little bit more to your creative process, and because we've got about 10 minutes left before we field some questions. And I guess why don't we make it specific to the piece we're going to hear today. So we've got a little bit, we've heard a little bit about your background in your collaboration, how that came to be. With this piece, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure the texts came first, and then you set Chanda's text to music. So Chanda, it was kind of on you first. Mm-hmm. So what was your creative process like in generating, you came up with 16 different poems or texts, or how do you refer to do you refer to it as poetry, or what do you think?
I refer to it as poetic. But again, I think this is also something that I didn't go to school for creative writing, so there's always kind of this weird in-between of, what am I doing? What do I call it? And then there's this letting go process. And I think that this is also important in what we do with improvisation, this kind of letting go and allowing. And yeah, this process was stressful. It was not easy. Because I feel like there were so many things that we were presented with, and it was okay. We want to address COVID and justice and the land and the environment, and of course we wanted to do everything. And I'm like, where do I start? And then Ike is like, I can't start the music till you give me these poems. And I pulled out a lot of hair. And there was a lot of sitting in front of my computer. I've never done so much just sitting and staring into space. And my husband is just like, what have you been doing for the past months? Every time I look up, you're just sitting and staring at something. But yeah, it was just really, there was a lot of allowing. And Ike, we met every week for a while. And Ike just really has this way about him. He's like, no, I believe that this is gonna be it. You're gonna write the stuff, it's gonna be great. I'm gonna be so inspired, and I believe this. Yeah. And this has been, I mean, maybe you don't know that about our relationship, but this has been an instrumental part of our relationship, of Ike believing, or like times when I'm like, oh my God, I'm not gonna do this anymore. Or after I had my child, oh no, I can't leave my house. And Ike's like, no, well, I'll see you, I'll give you a couple weeks, I'll see you, just get on the path train, you're coming, or no, I'll see you at service. And so, yeah, so it was really the allowing and this belief and this relationship, this communicating was instrumental. And there was a lot of Holy Spirit moving. Like there was a lot of moments we had that were just holy. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For one, I'm glad you stared off into space for as long as you did and didn't feel rushed. I'm glad that Ike was supportive in the process, because the text you came up with is stunning, absolutely stunning. And to a person in the choir, everyone, when we read through your words, was just so moved and so touched by it all.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, I think maybe the core of the actual creative process was I did want to create a liturgy, and I'm very inspired by liturgy and what it does for us, how we practice living. And there was so much mourning happening. Everyone I talked to, that was the core, and it got so heavy, and I'm like, what do I do with this? And the other thing was people didn't know what to do with it. We were all managing, but there was just this acknowledging of, wow, we're holding a lot, and we really don't know where to put this, what to do. And so one thing that I did remember from being in seminary, there's not a lot there are not a lot of liturgies for lament. And so I went online and I'm researching and trying to find what liturgies were out there, and I found a few, and I decided to just craft my own. And so that's where this began with that. So I wanted something that named what was happening, that acknowledged what we were feeling, but also brought us to a point of joy that didn't feel forced or fake.
Right.
So that was the core
Right.
of everything.
Well, we actually did a whole sermon series here about the word joy, right? And the depth. And I think that's a perfect, it's not happiness, right? Joy is something that grows out of, oftentimes that grows out of grief and sorrow. And that's a perfect, I think we all feel it when we're doing the music. It's like, yes, this, when it comes to this point towards the end, it's like, this is joy. Joy is, right? The second to last movement that you have there. All right, so Ike, now you get some pretty heavy stuff from Chanda coming over email, right? And you're checking out these texts. And what was, like, what's your process as the words are coming in, and are you feeling like excited, intimidated, nervous, ready to go, or is it like a mix of all of that?
Just absolutely thrilled, so moved by what Chanda wrote. And I was just feeling in this moment like I wish I could impart all of the feelings I had of my experience around this piece and what it felt like to go through all that, and I could just give everyone that. And maybe that's hopefully what will happen today when we play it. But I felt like it felt like on a personal level, like an absolute gift just to me. I felt like Chanda was almost preaching or speaking, encouraging me in this walk, this kind of progression through the music, through the text. And I just began this journey at New Year's, like at the beginning of January, and Adam and I kind of set out like a form of deadlines when things would be due, and it was. I just kind of set it as like a spiritual practice where in the morning I would go to the river near my house. It's about a mile away in the winter, and just start every day there. And then I'd come home, and I was scared at first because I thought, okay, Chanda gave me 16 poems. It's 45, 50 minutes. How do I do this? That's a lot of text to fit in. And at first we thought, oh, maybe we'll do bits and pieces, but then later you were like, nope, that's it. The whole thing is there, right? We like to give each other a hard time, like, keep each other accountable that way. But what I noticed after a while is that it was one piece. What Chanda wrote it has to all be there. And so every day I came home, and it was like, it just absolutely poured out. It was surprising and really cathartic to just notice, wow, like, as the first day I came home, the first two pieces, Gather and Reformation, came out in like an hour, completely done, just like they're almost like an improvisation. And so I just recorded them on my phone and then went back and had to write down and figure out what it was. And that continued through the whole piece. Every piece was like that. And some of them required more focus or more fine tuning, the text was so meaningful to me that I found at some point as a surprise, I'd be playing on my bass or on the piano or something, and as I'd be singing your words, the words would always tell me where to go. It was like, I feel almost like I wasn't in the process, like I was just something that the music was moving through, and the text was moving through. And I noticed at one point in every one of the movements, it brought me to tears in a surprise. Like, it would kind of be shocking to me, but the text would touch me so much that it was always a way of me knowing that this is it, that I'm on the right path because it's flowing. And I processed a lot of joy and grief and everything that's in that piece very directly through getting to experience your text. And it just always kind of showed me the way, so thank you. Yeah.
So I think we in the choir discovered, starting Thursday night, obviously we've been rehearsing your piece for a couple of months now, but we hadn't really fully realized, because it was just the choir parts and me on piano trying to best emulate whatever was going to be happening with the orchestra. And we started to hear it all come together Thursday night for the first time. And so it's with the choir, it's with string orchestra, and then there's this core ensemble of piano, percussion, we'll call it drums and some tabla, bass, guitar, trumpet, and saxophone. And then wonderfully talented Joe Fokey is the soloist on the piece, the lead singer, kind of almost like a cantor, if you will, throughout the work. And it was, I think I could see it in the choir's faces, like this realization of what this piece is, and this incredible synergy of your words and your music. And so before we start to take some questions, why don't you, Chanda still hasn't heard it, by the way. She's going to hear it for the first time this afternoon. So I'm not going to ask her to describe the piece. But Ike, if you had to tell, especially folks that aren't in the choir, right, what to expect this afternoon, how would you describe this piece in a couple of sentences?
Well, the first image I had in my mind, someone asked, how this felt yesterday. It was so joyful. Like, it's such a huge, powerful combination when you hear voices like this behind you and these beautiful string players and the soloist here. It feels a little bit like a spaceship taking off. It sounds funny, but I don't know how else to describe the feeling that I have when you feel that kind of soul and power, like when you're in the midst of a community like that. It's absolutely exhilarating. It's incredible. So I don't know how fine a point to put on it, but that's
let's clarify. It's like the Saturn V. It's not like that. We're not talking about the Jeff Bezos Amazon Joyride here.
Definitely.
This is
Let's
really,
be clear. Thank you for clarifying that,
Yes,
Adam.
yes.
We're specific about that.
Yeah, very specific.
Yeah.
Before we take a couple of questions, and we'll only have 10 minutes, I'm sorry but this was really wonderful conversation, and thank you both for opening up your lives to us. I asked back in the pastor studies, that's okay if we get into some of your background and stuff, and they were both totally open to that, so we really appreciate that. But while I'm giving thanks, it's important that I acknowledge Connect.Faith. So they're also a PC USA worshiping community based out of the New York City area, but they have a vibrant online ministry. If you actually go on to their website, it's connect.faith, not .com or .org, .faith. And they're the ones that commissioned Chanda's text. Originally, I had just thought of Ike, not personally knowing Chanda that well, and we had a little bit of talk back and forth about what the text should be, just Ike and I. And at that point, Ike said, well, I actually think we should commission Chanda, who I've collaborated with. And I knew of Chanda's writing through this one song or two songs actually, certainly Wide and Free. I knew of Wide and Free, and I thought, oh, that's beautiful. That is really beautiful stuff. And boy, Ike's music sounds really good with her words. So I was trusting and all in at the beginning, but we hadn't budgeted for an additional text commission. And so Connect.Faith stepped up, and they were the ones that commissioned Chanda's text. So we're really grateful to them, hugely grateful to them for doing that. And then, of course, I'm grateful to all of you who have contributed to our Sacred Concert Fund over the years, because it's because of your contributions to Sacred Concerts that we were able to commission Ike to write this work. And, that doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't happen without intention. It doesn't just, I feel like, money doesn't grow off of trees. Commissions don't grow off of trees. It's like, it's because of John Kuzma's vision for a Sacred Concert Fund, and then your continued participation in that we are now able to support and help craft and create this music. And I think sometimes people can over platitude or whatever, and I try not to be like that. And I really don't think I'm exaggerating when I say this piece is for the whole of humanity. It really is. It goes well beyond these walls. It goes well beyond Denver. And I fully expect to get emails from Ike and Chanda in the months and the years ahead saying, hey, this choir here is doing this piece, And that's what you've done. So thank you. All right, so we have a few minutes for some questions, and I've been told there's a microphone in the aisle for your question asking. So I feel like now we're at a school board meeting. Yes, approach the microphone, Robert.
Is the mic on? Yes, it is. Okay. First, thank all three of you for this wonderful time. And I'm so thankful to have talked with each of you about this piece, to be a very small part of it this afternoon. But one thing I would like for all three of you to share with everyone here is the collaborative effort, in addition to the two of you and your direction, Adam, with the choir, with the whole community here. It really was, there was a lot of collaboration. And if you just share a little bit of that for a second, I think it'd be good. Thank you.
So what Bob is, I think, no, he's not alluding to, he's definitely suggesting that we talk about, would be how we intentionally decided to involve the choir in this writing process. And that began back in October with our fall retreat. And it wasn't really my idea, it was really your guys' idea. And I said, well, that sounds interesting, let's go for it and let's see what it's like. And why don't you share a little bit about what you all wanted to get out of that?
Yeah, to me, it was really important to, in this time of listening and kind of hearing voices, whether that be voices in this community, voices around the world, voices of the marginalized. When Shannon and I started talking every week, we said, how can this be collaborative? We're big fans of involving everyone and having everyone have their voice be heard. And so that's a tricky thing. With Adam said, wait, how do we do that with 80 singers? Or, how does this work? And so we had hoped to try to even get Shanda out here, and it wasn't possible because she's singing all over the world and doing stuff all the time. But I came out last fall to meet with the choir and sort of get to know people and have this workshop of playing. And I just want to share 2 quick stories about that. Shanda mentioned the Holy Spirit being so prevalent and so involved in this piece, and I really can't describe that. There's no way I can actually describe that to you right now because there are too many points of connection, but a couple of beautiful moments that happened that I can share. One is when we first played, I improvised a little bit, kind of modeling this psalm and this idea of playing downstairs when I first came here. And Shanda and I had decided this idea of the river. This piece was going to be about a river. Shanda's always about water and talking about these images. And so it was a way to kind of combine all of these ideas together. And so we were really excited about that, but we hadn't told anyone about that. And I played a little bass solo, and I asked people to sort of meditate, be quiet, and be still, and where is this music taking you? And a woman in the choir, it was quiet after I played, and I said, would someone share with me an image that came to mind, or where this led you? And it was quiet, and a woman raised her hand and said, I see a river. The very first thing that was said downstairs, and I have goosebumps right now thinking about it. And so that was one of many, many things that just ended up kind of clarifying or letting us know that we were on the path, that we were hearing what I believe God was asking us to kind of put into the air here. And then the other thing was at the end of that workshop, I was speaking. Shanda actually wrote to me that morning, and we'd been back and forth a bunch about ideas. And Shanda wrote to me, I woke up, it's all these images around water, but that morning she woke up and said, hey, for some reason, the verse in Romans that talks about nothing can separate us from the love of God, neither height nor depth or anything else in all creation. And so I had that in my head all day as we were working the workshop. And at the end of the workshop, Peter, I think I saw him here earlier, but he said, I was speaking with him, and he said, walk out in the garden. Just take a walk out there after this workshop. And I walked out, and the stone crosses there, and etched in stone it says, neither height nor depth or anything else in all of creation. And I was just, man, it was really powerful. So weird, so strange, and so on point. So it was just, there are many, many things like that have happened along the way that have just been absolute gifts, so.
There's one other thing. When you were here, I think you all had a workshop where there was butcher paper, and you answered a few questions, and I think it was what came out of the stillness of our quarantine time, and a few other questions. And Ike, or I think you sent me, someone took pictures and sent them to me. And Jocelyn, sent them to me. And I did go through all of them, and I kind of put things in categories. And that was really instrumental also in the writing process, because there were so many themes that branched out of not just, they weren't just themes here, but there were also people that I was speaking with in Vienna, or people that I knew from New York, and those themes were the same. And so I did use them in the writing process. So we were co-writers.
I think we have time for just one more question, and then if there is another question, or maybe there isn't. Okay. Oh, yes.
Hi, I'm not part of the choir. I just happen to be sitting here because my son is being confirmed here shortly. But I played jazz piano or jazz trumpet in high school, and we had a afternoon with Wynton Marsalis, and he was frankly very intimidating. He was very trying to be open, but it became apparent that I was not a jazz musician. But he tried to convey mostly that writing and performing and even improvising jazz music was about conveying feeling and sharing emotion. I wondered if you could speak on that, because his 10-minute speech sits with me today, 30 years in the future.
You want to go, Chanda, or me?
Wow, I have a lot of things to say.
I know that's a lot.
Me too. Briefly, I'll say I got to play with Wynton when I was really young, and I had a kind of a similar experience, actually. But he's an incredible player, incredible musician. And one of his colleagues came and worked with me and unplugged my bass amp and said, "Oh, you have to play all acoustic." I was in high school, so my fingers I had blisters on my fingers, but there's an intensity about what he does that's powerful. And I think one beautiful thing I think about jazz is that it allows, and maybe the way that we can involve it in spirit and in a worship situation, is that we're each made differently. We're each knitted together in a unique way, and the music allows that to come through in a really personal and unique way. And so when Chanda writes her text, it's all her. There's no one else that writes text in that way. And hopefully that, and for me as well, I've listened to so many different things, and the music will emerge in this sort of knitted together fashion of all these different influences. And but it's me, it's Chanda, it's us, it's the community, it's all put together. And I think the music, there's something really unique about that listening kind of vulnerable process of putting yourself out there in a way that you don't quite know how it's going to go, but you know that you're being led in a certain way. And I bet you are a jazz musician, actually. That's all I heard in what you said. And I think it's important to give people space to believe that for themselves. If you're feeling led in a certain way, what does that look like? How can you explore that? So we'll have to talk later. But I think the music gives us such an unbelievable opportunity to be ourselves and to express what God's telling us.
Yeah, exactly. I'm thinking about that's the beauty of improvisatory music, that it's so personal, and I think it's interesting in so many art forms. There's kind of this belief that you are the artist if someone else says that you are, right? And so I think it's so interesting. I was just talking to a friend. She's now an incredible chef. She's a baker, but she had a background in singing and theater. And she says, "Oh, okay, well, I'm not a singer because I'm not doing that." I'm like, "Well, of course you're still a singer. This is your expression. This is your God-given expression." And so improvisation also means something different with everyone, but I truly believe that it's all holy. It's a holy expression. So like Ike, I believe, if this is your heart, then go for it. Do your jazz. It doesn't matter if you're doing it in the bathroom mirror by yourself. It's still your thing, right?
I think that's a beautiful note to end it on. I hope, well, certainly for the choir, I hope you come back at 4 o'clock. And for everyone else here, I hope you come back at 4 o'clock for our holy expression, Let the River Flow. Let's have another round of applause for Chanda Rule and Ike Sturm.
Thank you.